Right, hi there everyone. Welcome back to another video. Guys, again, we have built our coronavirus kind of platform within our YouTube to do some educational tutorial videos for those of you with a business that are looking to try and navigate the horrible atmosphere that now exists around the coronavirus and how you deal and manage with your staff. So as you can tell, gradually as time has gone by, we have been able to get more and more detail out from the government as to how certain schemes are going to operate. And on the 26th of March, we got a bit more information around the coronavirus job retention scheme. And now that we have that, what I want to do is go through a tutorial with you guys so you can know how to apply this scheme into your business and also how to navigate your way around it and any questions that you may have. At the moment in time, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Markham. I'm from Cavill HR. We are experts within the field of HR and payroll for hospitality clients, restaurants, bars, bistros, and pubs. So guys, right now, what I want to do is go through this particular platform for you. And really, we build this upon a lot of, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of questions around the coronavirus, in particular around the job retention scheme. And I just want to go through quite a few of the common questions that we've had that's helped us to build this particular kind of tutorial that we're going to go through. So what are we going to cover? So in this tutorial video, what we're going to cover is we're going to look at what are the eligibility criteria for a member of staff to be able to be furloughed. We're going to look at, obviously, what are the underlying principles of being furloughed. For those of you that still yet have not heard of the dreaded F word of being furloughed, this relates specifically to the coronavirus job retention scheme. And we will go through that in a few more details. But if you haven't heard of that term yet, you are lucky, but you will hear a lot of it within this particular segment. We're going to look at, can furloughed staff still volunteer? Do furloughed staff still accrue annual leave? What happens to somebody's annual leave throughout the period of time while someone is being furloughed? Can I bring my furloughed staff back to work? And how do you do that? And what are the measures you need to consider? How can this work in your business? If you haven't furloughed anybody yet, and you're considering this moving forward over the next month or more, what is it and how is it going to work and operate in your business? If you've not come to answer that yet yourself, how do you calculate individual pay? So if you're furloughing somebody and through the job retention scheme, you can attract back 80% of somebody's salary up to a maximum of $2,500. How do you calculate that in your pay? Do you have to pay the additional 20%? So like I just said there, you get the 80% back from the government through the scheme. Do you then, as an employer, have to pay the additional 20%? How do we apply for the grant? When will businesses receive the money? Oh my God. Now, those are the diamond questions that I get asked an awful lot throughout this process, as you can imagine. Guys, we've got a lot to go through, so I'm going to get crack-a-lacking straight on with this. So basically, what are the eligibility criteria for this grant? I think the first thing to point out, if you haven't seen the video around SSP, the same thing would apply here. So when you watch that video, please check that out next. When you watch that video, this is a grant. It's a scheme. The important definition of that thereby means that this is not a loan. You are not having to pay this back. This is a government grant for you and your business. So that's the first thing to clearly articulate here. The next thing is who is actually eligible? Well, if you are a business, if you are a charity, if you are a recruitment agency with workers who are paid, through PAYE, or if you are a public authority, you will be eligible under this scheme as a business to operate the job retention scheme, by where the government will give you 80% up to a maximum of £2,500 towards your staff costs, your wage bill. Now, there's a very, very key definition here that came out on the 26th of March through the government, and that is that in order for this to be applicable to any of your staff within your business, they would have to have been enrolled on a PAYE payment scheme for your business on or before the 28th of February 2020, and you must have a UK bank account. Now, guys, quite clearly, this does open up a loophole that people, unfortunately, they're going to fall through. So if you imagine, through no fault of somebody's own fruition, that they went and got another job, and they actually left one job in February and started a new job after February, i.e., on the 1st of March, let's say, they would not be eligible under the scheme. That means that a person would have started a new job and they will not be eligible to be able to claim 80% of their salary back, even though they could have worked for somebody for years and years before, and then they've gone and got a new job. They would fall through the scheme. They do not get that recognition within this particular segment. So the best thing that I can suggest for somebody who has actually fallen through this gap is that they consider other alternative options. Those options are, for you as a business, your first options is to obviously review the continued employment of that person potentially for the period of time that you're going through. If that person's just started, you may want to look at potentially doing a layoff situation. Again, if you haven't checked out our video on layoffs, I recommend that you do that, and that will be up online shortly. But you can look at layoffs. You can look at making people unpaid. You can look at using annual leave for short periods of time. Obviously, they may still be entitled to SSP for some of their sickness if they've been off with coronavirus or self-isolating. Again, check out the video around that. Alternatively, these people may have to go and actually just go and register with Universal Credit and see what support they can get from the government through those particular mechanisms as well. What I will say is, from experience so far with other clients who have had people that fall into this particular category, there's a couple of options that they've explored. Some people have been placed on unpaid leave. So for that period of time, they've been unpaid. They've signed and agreed that. The premise behind that is obviously they are keeping a job to go to afterwards. So that is the significant factor for somebody who's signed up to that. And they can then still go for universal credit afterwards. The alternative really is, and we'll come onto this in a later section of this video, in this tutorial, is realistically, you're then also considering if people have a probationary contract. If they do, then you could be looking at using those kind of terms, and we have had clients that have done that as well, and unfortunately have terminated contracts under the probationary period. And equally, people have also been looking at redundancies, and we've had clients that have already done that as well too, sadly enough. However, like I said, it does mean that if you have somebody who started in your company, your business, whatever the nature of your business is, and they started after that 28th of February deadline, they will not be eligible under this scheme. So you will need to think of your other alternatives for those people. So now we've got that out of the way, we're going to have a look at the employee groups that actually you can claim for. So if you found out you're a business, that's a great start, and you're eligible, you've had people on the payroll from the 28th or before February, then you will have a certain proportion of people that will fall into one of these three categories that you can claim for under the job retention scheme. So if you have staff who are full or part-time, that isn't staff that have varying hours. That's staff that will have, for example, if your business operates on the premise that 40 hours a week is a full-time person, they would fall into that category. If they do 35, they are part-time, and they'd still fall into that category. If you have agency workers, so if you're a company that is actually like a recruitment agency and you have agency workers that are working for you, they will fall into this, so you can claim for them. And if you do have casual workers / 0-hour workers who are working for you, they also come into this category, and you can also claim for them too. So let's have a further look at some more parts of this eligibility criteria for you. I'll just move myself out of the way there. So one of the key things we've already touched on here is around the 28th of February deadline. But However, what happens if somebody was laid off, and they would have been employed, by the way, since before the 28th of February, they were laid off when this mess and this crisis started to hit, or worse still, as we've had with other people, they have actually made people redundant. The whole point of this scheme, and the whole reason it's backdated to the 1st of March 2020, is to help that particular group of people that did get laid off, that did lose their job for redundancy because of the coronavirus. It is to help them to ensure they can retain their job, keep their employment, and still get a salary, even if it's 80% of what their normal salary would have been. So let me just be clear. What that means is, if your business on the 5th of March had a lot of hindsight and said, do you know what? I think this is going to turn into a major crisis here. We need to shut down some of our staff wage bill. So therefore, we're going to have to do a redundancy process. And you operated a redundancy process, and unfortunately, you had to make a proportion of people redundant to save your staff costs, when knowing that this coronavirus was going to hit, because you were just on the ball and absolutely awesome and knew what was going to happen. Well, in that case, if you did that and you did make people redundant, what this scheme enables you to do is rehire them back. You can take them back on as though the redundancy did not occur, as though it didn't happen at all. And in that sense of things, you would then be able to reclaim the 80% of their salary under this scheme. Like I said, thus securing that person employment and salary and helping you out as an employer. That's the premise of backdating it to the 1st of March. What I want to make clear, because again, like I said at the very beginning, had a litany of questions around a lot of these areas, and this is a fairly big one we've had a lot of questions around. And there's been confusion with some where they believed that you will just be able to backdate your wages for the end of March to the 1st of March and reclaim that through this scheme. So for the entirety of March, for all of your staff, you would be able to just reclaim it. Or you could just claim that they were furloughed from that period of time. That is not why that date is there. You can only claim for this scheme if your staff have been furloughed. And if your staff weren't furloughed on that period of time, or weren't laid off, or weren't made redundant and you're bringing them back into your fold, into your business, then you wouldn't be able to claim for the scheme from that date. Yeah? So quite clearly, a lot of people are thinking the 1st of March, it's backdated to then, and that's the way I can work it. It doesn't work that way. You'd have to have furloughed them from that period of time. Just to be clear as to why you can't backdate the furloughment, and being careful with the terminology here, but the reason you can't backdate that is because if that person was working on that particular day, then they technically would never have been able to have been furloughed, because in order to be furloughed, an individual, an employee, is not permitted to undertake any work on behalf of the organization. Now, I will leave directors of businesses to one side on that statement for 1 minute, but you would never be able to backdate it because those people would have been working. So therefore, the furloughment wouldn't be applicable. So literally, that 1st of March date is there to help for those businesses that did so happen to conduct some layoffs earlier on in March, before this scheme became operational and came out in the headlines on the 20th of March, and to help those businesses that actually made people redundant because of this, to bring them back and to secure their job and to secure their wages, or 80% of it, up to the maximum of 2,500. Now, like I said, individuals, they should be written to. So it's how not many people had ever heard of the word furloughment, which is actually something that's more from America than from the UK. Realistically, what I would say is to think of it as a sabbatical. That's a term that most people are more commonly aware of here, but that's the same sense of things. If you are going to be making any changes to somebody's contract, or the changes that you're going to make or trying to enforce will impact on that person's salary, their wages that they're going to take home at every week, fortnightly or month, however you pay your staff, then you must get that individual's consent and agreement if it's not already within their contracts. So just to be clear, and we will come on to this in a minute, but you should be writing to your staff, and you will have either a letter that will ask them to sign to accept the fact that they will be furloughed, or a letter that will notify them that they are being furloughed because you've got a layoff clause within your contracts. But you should be writing to those staff. Those staff should not be working under any circumstances. And depending on when you did actually furlough your staff, the payments under the job retention scheme will be backdated to that point to a maximum of the 1st of March 2020. And like we said, only those that were on your payroll on the 28th of February or before would be eligible under this particular scheme. So let's have a look at some of these principles. And there's going to be a few. The key thing that I started to touch on there with you and is it comes down to your contracts, because ultimately the whole process of furloughing a person and going through furloughing staff is still built within employment law. You still have to follow employment law when it comes to going through this process, regardless of the fact that there's a crisis going on. That does not go by the wayside. And what that means, and what I was trying to get on earlier on around the contracts of employment, is if you don't have, for example, if you have staff, and this is a common theme that keeps on coming up, your staff do not have a written statement of particulars. That's a contract in sorts. If they do not have that and you haven't provided it to them, they still have a contract with you. It's implied that they have a contract because they're doing work, and in recompense for that, you're paying them. So thereby, you both have a contract that's binding. What you don't have is the secure terms of what that contract is. So in other words, you're paying somebody for money and they're working for money, but neither party has any written terms and conditions as to what that relationship is and how that's been formed and what happens around that. And there's so many different questions that can come out of that. But in particular, what people are finding now is, like I said, there's a lot of terms here that are coming out that people have never heard of before, about layoffs, about being furloughed, and all these different bits, and short time working, and all these things. People have not heard of these before. And if you don't have a written statement of particulars or a contract with your staff, then nailed on, you probably don't have a layoff clause, because I hazard a guess, it's highly unlikely that when somebody started coming and working with you don't have a contract that's in writing, that you sat down and had a conversation around these particular circumstances. So in those senses, if you don't have a contract, moving on after this process, then clearly what everyone is starting to find is there is not just a legal background for why you should have written statements of particulars with your staff, but there's an ethical and logical background as to why you would have those with your staff, because all of these things are coming out right now. So if you are looking to furlough your staff, you need to assess if your contracts of employment have a layoff clause. Now, if you clearly don't have a written contract with your staff, the answer is no. If you do, look at them and check if they do. If you have that clause within there, then you have the ability to furlough staff and reduce pay in that sense of things. And in that case, you can write to your staff and formally notify them. Still have to write to them and letting them know that you're placing them on furlough, and that at the moment is for the foreseeable future. And there is a lot of different letters that are around that can help you with that. But if you need support, then you will get our contact details at the end of this. Happy to help. If you don't have that clause in your contract, or if you don't have a written contract, you are going to have to seek to get their consent to apply this process. So if you're one of those employers that has just told your staff you're furloughed, boom, done, not good enough. If you're one of those employers that doesn't have a contract with your staff in writing and has said to them you're furloughed and written to them to notify them as such, but not sought their consent, it's not good enough again. And the reason for that is under principle, if you imagine this, if at any time you are going to be altering the terms of your agreement with somebody, or you're going to be reducing the level of pay that they're going to be getting, you must get their consent, regardless of what that is or what that's for, unless there's a legal directive to you as a company to deduct money from somebody's salary. You must get their consent. If you don't get their consent, then potentially it's an unlawful deduction of wages. If you don't get their consent and you're doing something that's actually not in keeping with the nature of the contract, then potentially you're in breach of the contract as well. And this is what I mean by employment law doesn't fall by the wayside. What you don't want to do is make rash reactions, think you're doing the right thing because you feel you need to do something quick because everything's happening today immediately. The news is changing every week and every day. You need to get on top of it. So you rush to do stuff. You don't follow it through in the right way. You can still slip up under employment law because that still applies. It doesn't go by the wayside. You still have to treat your staff in accordance with the law. And like I said, the key thing here is making sure that, you know, if your staff don't have a contract in writing, you still have one that's implied, and therefore you would still have to go through the same process for your staff. Just ensure that your staff are actually on the payroll. Now, obviously this continues, and you can see it carries on. There's a lot more around this furloughment stuff than we actually gave credit for. So if you are actually looking to imply this, like I said, the law still applies. Now, let's take a case scenario that if you are a restaurateur and as part of your actions, you're saying, okay, I'm going to remain partially open, and I'm going to remain partially open so I can run a takeaway on the side, but I won't need all my staff because obviously my operations are going to shrink down to such a degree that I don't need to keep them all retained and working. And we already know that if somebody's working for you, they cannot be furloughed. If they're working, you can't be furloughed. So those people that aren't working, you can potentially look to furlough. But you still have to be careful because your decisions as to who is staying on, those people are entitled to full pay. So if somebody's not being furloughed and they're working, then nothing's really changed for them. They should still be getting their full pay throughout this process. That means that you could have somebody who's getting paid 80% and somebody who's getting paid 100%. And what you need to do is clearly articulate why one person is being sent home on 80% and why the other person is having to come into work and is getting 100%. So you need to make sure that the steps that you're taking are reasonable. There are identifiable reasons behind it, business case reasons for doing it. And also you are not being discriminatory in the reasons as to why you are keeping somebody on 100% in your kitchen and why you're sending somebody home. So quite clearly, for example, if you're running a takeaway, you will still probably need your cook or your chef. And if you've only got one of those, then clearly that is a good reason, business reason, for that person to be remaining. But if you've got a number of waiters, why you would want to keep the waiters if you're doing takeaways mainly is beyond me, but that may well be the case. Why would you select one above other people? And you need to consider that, because you can't just draw people out of the hat that you like this person more than the other person, and that's why they get 100% of the salary and the other one gets 80. There has to be good, sound business, logical reasons or selections that you've gone through to identify the right people who are staying on as core business to help you to do that, and those that are being sent home and being furloughed on the 80% of their salary. The next key thing to remember is that if you are furloughing anybody, in order to benefit from the job retention schemes, the coronavirus job retention scheme, you must have them furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So if that 3 weeks is disturbed for whatever reason, if you're bringing people back or you put them onto sickness absence at the moment in time, that would be a disturbance to the furloughment. It would be shorten the period of time they've been furloughed, and your company wouldn't be eligible to reclaim that 80%. That means that you are then liable for the money that they are owed through that particular process for your staff. So you're not actually saving anything there, and you wouldn't be getting any help from the government for those that are not furloughed for the whole entire 3 weeks. Just to put this into perspective, I can't remember, this wasn't a question that came to us, but we picked it up from another forum, and somebody had the idea that I think it was a factory. They were going to follow their staff a week on, week off, week on, week off. The idea being that, you know, they'd have a proportion of staff in for a week, and then once that week's over, that proportion would be furloughed. The people that were furloughed the previous week would then come in for the next week, and they will swap it around. That's fine, but they will be liable for all of those costs. There will be no support for them through the coronavirus job retention scheme. So for a business that's operating in that way, clearly there's a disruption to the 3 weeks, continuous weeks of being furloughed. They would not then be eligible to be able to claim under this particular scheme. So again, the key thing here for me is, like I said before, I think I said this in the SSP video tutorial, is the government normally, when the government makes changes like this to the law or to the provisions around dealing with your staff or a particular scheme that's there in the first place, they tend to go through a number of stages that takes actually quite a bit of time. So they go through consultation with businesses and different people in society. They'll write white papers. It'll be debated. It'll be debated at cabinet, and all sorts of different things would happen. So by the time they actually do come to outroll a scheme or a new law or a process, it's actually gone through quite a rigid process of review to know exactly what it is they're going to do. What we're experiencing here is all of that happening in a matter of days. So literally something that sometimes can take a year or more is being crammed into days. And you know, it's not anybody's fault that what you get is a headline of what the government's planning to do to try and help and support people and businesses and what have you. But what happens is the devil's in the detail, and the detail is what comes out later. And the wheels of government take a lot longer than normal to kind of churn. It's a massive machine, and you know, it's like trying to do a handbrake turn on an oil tanker. It's hard to do. So quite clearly, there are going to be little flaws in this. There's going to be loopholes in this. They may be plugged later, and we may get more clarity on that later. But we can only put out what is there now. And what we will do is we will only advise based on what the government is actually advising at this time. All the other hypotheticals and all the other things that are out on other forums or stuff that's not actually correct, we're not taking notice of that. We are literally advising based on what the government are stating is applicable right now. But this is one area where there is an actual hole. So, for example, and we spoke about earlier, those staff that started after the 28th of February, that's a hole. Here's another one, and that is if you bring people back from the job retention scheme, so you furloughed them, they've been furloughed for 3 weeks, you can claim for it, and then all of a sudden you want to bring them back. There is no, at the moment in time, there is no defined minimum period for a person to come back before they can be furloughed again. So you could potentially bring somebody back for a day and then furlough them again the next day. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could do. But it does mean that if you wanted to do a cycle, then potentially you could work that cycle on a 3-week cycle rather than a week cycle like that example I gave you earlier on, to try and help you to do that. But what it does mean is that obviously there is, if you need to put someone quickly back and be furloughed, or all of a sudden things take a turn for the worse and you can't bring these people back you've brought them back to do some of the takeaways and to help on some of the stress there, and all of a sudden things take a turn for the worse and you need to actually just shut up. That's your next strategical move. You don't have to wait a period of time before you can do that. You don't have to wait for a certain period of time to then furlough them again in case it would impact on your ability to claim under the scheme. It won't. There isn't anything there about that at the moment in time. So quite clearly, you know, the key thing here is the 3-week cycle and making sure that you don't fall short of that in any way, shape or form, because otherwise you will not be eligible under this scheme. So you'll hear this a lot from me. I hope no one gets offended by this, by the way, but it is what it is. You know, at the end of the day, you cannot be half pregnant. You can't be part pregnant and part not pregnant. And that applies with so much when it comes to dealing with your staff. I always, for me, imagine things in boxes and different categories, and I put things into certain ones, and that's the way you work. When you're looking at employee relations cases around disciplinaries and grievances, etc., or whether you're looking at things like what we're dealing with right now, You need to identify what category you're in and deal with it in that nature. You can't be in all sorts of different boxes. You can't be half pregnant and half not pregnant. You've got to be one or the other. And that's a very, very good way of looking at this, because what it means is that your staff, they can't be, for example, sick and furloughed. You can't be on sick pay and furloughed. If somebody took a year sabbatical and got sick whilst they were off, they're not going to phone you up and say, can I have some SSP, please? It doesn't work. You're on a sabbatical. That's how this is. And likewise, if someone was on maternity and they're actually taking their maternity and they got a cold or they fell sick, they wouldn't be entitled to SSP either, because they're on maternity. So if you have staff that are coming up for going on maternity, maybe they're taking a proportion of their annual leave, which is quite normal before they actually go on maternity leave, or they're already in their maternity leave or paternity leave or adoption leave, or shared parental leave. At the end of the day, they cannot be in that category and furloughed. It doesn't work. So all the normal parameters around that, for example, with maternity, in the very beginning, in the first 6 weeks, they'll be entitled to 90% of their average weekly earnings. So if you have someone who's just about to go on maternity, guess what? You can't furlough them. You're going to be beholden to the maternity agreements. So you will have to pay your staff as they should be paid in lines with maternity, because that's the box they fall into. There's a pun here around the pregnant, half pregnant maternity, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, if someone's pregnant and they're going on maternity leave, then they will go through that particular mechanism. If somebody is sick and they're on SSP for whatever reason, whether it be through the coronavirus and self-isolation, or whether it be just general sickness, they're in SSP. You can't be sick and furloughed, technically. Watch the video about SSP to find out more about that, though. And likewise, if you're on holiday, you can't be on holiday and furloughed. You know, it's just working this out. That obviously, if you're on furloughment, you're on furloughment. That's it. Nothing else, nothing more. If you're on maternity or adoption leave or paternity leave or shared parental leave or annual leave or whatever the case may be, maybe you already are on a sabbatical, who knows? At the end of the day, you will fall into that category and not be furloughed. And that's the very key difference here, okay? So this is another massive question we get quite a lot. It's around staff volunteering. So if I have a member of staff, I've shut my pub, I've sent all my staff home, I don't have a contract with them in writing, but I have made sure that I've given them a letter, they've all approved it and signed it, that's fine and dandy. They've gone home. Can they then volunteer? Well, the answer is yes. Yes, they can. If a person's been furloughed by you, I think it's been in the news quite recently about air hostesses that have been able to go and volunteer for the NHS. They've been furloughed and that's what they're doing, and that's great. And your staff can do exactly the same thing. The main category here to remember is your staff cannot and should not be conducting any work for you. That means that if they're conducting any work that will generate you income or working for your business or organization in any way, shape or form on behalf of your company, then they are not technically volunteering. Remember, HMRC have said they withhold the right to go and audit all of this, which means that if they find that somebody hasn't actually been working and they investigate that, then the furloughment wouldn't have been applicable. And potentially if someone is volunteering whilst they're for your business doing work for you that they would normally be doing if they were working, but is furloughed, then potentially that is fraudulent activity. So volunteering, yes, acceptable. Volunteering after being furloughed and coming back into your business and helping you to generate income, unacceptable, not appropriate. If someone's furloughed, they cannot work for you, full stop. So I'm going to move me out of the way here because clearly I'm banging the way. So do staff still accrue holidays? This is another really common question that we get as well. So at the moment in time, depending on how much annual leave you're actually giving your staff, the statutory entitlement is 5.6 weeks. So that's the 28 days. That's inclusive of bank holidays within that figure. So if you're operating on the statutory, that's what your staff will be entitled to. And yes, your staff will continue to accrue their statutory annual leave entitlement whilst they're furloughed. They're still employed. Their contract hasn't ended. Their continuous service has not ceased. they are still entitled to annual leave. So they will still keep building up their annual leave entitlement, even though they're not working for you at the moment in time, because they're at home on a furloughment/sabbatical. Now, obviously, if you operate a system whereby you give more than a statutory entitlement, again, if they've contractually obliged to have, say, for example, rather than 28 days, you're giving them 32. If that's the case, and they're getting 32 days, they would still accrue the amount of annual leave that they're contractually obliged to have. The main thing is it cannot be any less than the statutory entitlement that they're entitled to under law. Employment law still applies. Boring saying, I know, but it does. Now, can I bring a furloughed staff person back to work? As we've already said, yes, you can. You can bring them back to work whenever you want. But the key thing is, under the mechanism of the job retention scheme, if you bring somebody back before they've completed the whole of the 3 weeks of their furloughment, you will not be able to claim back from the scheme for them, which means you are going to have to pay your staff member for those days they've been at home. It would not apply in that same way. However, you can bring people back to work whenever you want, and if they've worked for the 3 weeks, you can bring them back afterwards too. What we would recommend doing is, again, writing to those individuals and notifying them that this date you'll be expected to come back from furloughment and would be expected to return back to work, unless that person is sick, unless that person is also sick with coronavirus, or is self-isolating because they're in a household with somebody who has the dreaded coronavirus. Now, like I said before, no minimum date has been outlined by the government as of yet for how long a person has to come back for before they can be furloughed again. But if you do furlough someone for 3 weeks and bring them back and then furlough them again, remember the second time round, it's still the same principles. They still have to be furloughed for 3 weeks or more for you to be able to claim the 80% back as part of the job retention scheme. How could this work in your business? Well, guys, I mean, if you're not operating this by this time already, which, by the way, many businesses have already operated this. So realistically, right now, if you're not operating it, then you really need to get into this very quickly. If you are operating it, then you should be going through this to make sure and ensure you've done everything you should have done by the book, and your strategies are in line for how you're planning to work your business over the next few months. And the planning around this is impeccable. I cannot put that in bold and doubly, triply underline that enough. Your plan, your strategy is vital right now. Never before has it been more. I mean, it's important anyway in business, but never before has it been more important than it is right now. So how can this work in your business? Like I said, and I'm going to keep saying it, but the principles in employment law still apply. Just because we're going through a crisis doesn't mean the government have relaxed the employment law or employment legislation. You still have to ensure that the selection of your staff who are furloughed is done in the correct way, and you are not indirectly or directly discriminating against anybody. Now, the next question is really looking about how you calculate the salary for your furloughed staff. And for me, there's still more to come out on this personally when it comes to how you actually put this into your systems and work this out, especially when you start looking at if you've got staff that aren't paid monthly and are paid fortnightly or are paid weekly. I think there's still a lot more support to come out around that and guidance. However, the broad principles are, we're going to put this into two different categories here. So the agency workers, we'll come on to those in a minute, but that would include also your casual workers as well within that context. So your full-time and part-time staff, very easy. Basically, the principle is the salary that you paid your staff as of the end of February, that's less, no fees, so no fees are applied to that, no commissions, no bonuses, their basic gross salary, they would be entitled to 80% of that as of what it was in February, up to a maximum of £2,500. Okay, that's easy. We'll put that to one side, okay? Again, if you need to work that out for your weekly staff though, or fortnightly paid staff, then obviously it's based on a maximum of £2,500 per month. So you're looking at a month. So you need to work out what those individuals received in February and then apply 80% of that to your next month's as they're furloughed, okay? So that's the key category there. Then the agency workers should have had in there / casual workers. Your agency workers may actually blend across the two. So if their salaries jump up and down, we're fluid, then they'll be in this category, the white box. If their salaries don't flux up and down, don't vary, they'll be in this box as a full-time, part-time person. But your casual workers and your agency workers who feature here, they will be on either 80% of their salary for the same month last year, 2019, or they'll be on the average earnings of 2019 to 20's tax year, whichever is the most, up to a maximum of £2,500. And again, it's based, everything that the government's put out here in terms of the guidance is based on monthly values. So if your staff are weekly or fortnightly paid, you need to assess that into a monthly value as to what your staff will get paid. If you still operate your payroll over a weekly basis, you need to make sure that your weekly salaries at the end of the month add up to what their 80% of their salary should be for that particular month, if that makes sense. So it's whichever is most. So you need to look at, if somebody wasn't with you 12 months ago, then literally you are only going based on the average. If somebody's if somebody has been with you for all of that time, then you should be looking at what they were on this month last year, and you should then also be assessing what their average is over the course of the 19-20 tax year to assess which one is the most and which one they should get paid, and it's 80% of that. And the key thing around this, guys, is even if you are paying the 80%, okay, you will still be liable for any of the income tax deductions, employees' national insurance deductions, employers' national insurance contributions, and you'd also be having to pay the pensions contributions as well. So all of those things still apply; they do not go away. But then what happens to the other 20%? So we've already established the job retention scheme covers you for people who've been furloughed for 3 or more weeks from the 1st of March onwards, who've been employed with you since the 28th of February or before, for up to 80% of their salary. We've just done that. So what happens to the other 20%? Well, quite clearly, this is something that is up to you. You do not have to pay that additional 20% if you do not want to, or if you cannot sustain that at the moment in time in terms of your cash flow predicaments. So there is no onus on you to do that. However, if you did do so and want to do so, then that's fine. But remember, you are still liable for the whole of the income tax, national insurance, employers' national insurance contributions and pensions on the whole amount, not just the 20%, okay? And the other thing is you've got to be clear. Remember those letters we said that you'd send out to your staff who are being furloughed? Well, if you are furloughing those staff and they are not getting the 100%, they're only getting the 80%, you're deducting from their wages. Remember what you said about deductions from wages? You have to have that in that letter. So your letter, if you are doing that, should be specifying that during this period of time, they will only be paid 80% of their salary. So, the golden ticket question. When can you claim the coronavirus job retention scheme payments? When can you start getting on board to get that? Because we all get that you can do this. We all know you've got to go through these different loopholes to get it. We know the eligibility criteria. We know how it's now meant to operate. And now we know we've got to pay these people for their 80%. When can the business recoup some of that money to try and help them with their own cash flows and to get through this potential crisis? And the problem with that is, as I sit here today, recording this video and actually writing this tutorial slide deck, there is no answer to this particular question. So the idea is that obviously this is a whole, like I said, it's the wheels of government. We are handbrake turning an oil tank here, and it's really, really hard to do it. And at the end of the day, HMRC and the government are going to have to actually put in place a portal that companies are going to have to apply through to be able to reclaim this money. That portal is not up yet. It is not available at this moment in time to do that. It is due to come into operation early in April. And the whole idea is that then the payments for that process would start to become available at the end of April. And that's the way the mechanism it is meant to work. So at the moment in time, this is kind of there isn't a straight answer to this, but there is some guidance as to what the government are aiming to try and achieve, if that gives any answer whatsoever to that question. But it's a really difficult one to actually nail down on. Now, guys, I did say that putting in place a plan, whether you're planning around your finances, which is also critically important, or whether you're planning around how you're going to be managing your staff and how you're going to be moving the pawns on the chessboard around to help navigate your business through this particular crisis, that plan is vital. So if you take these tools, if you take these tips from these videos that I'm doing at the moment in time and apply these into your business so you know what to do if and when different scenarios may arise, then great, do it. Please do it. Whatever you do, whether it's through us or whether it's through yourself or someone else, please plan, because if you don't, then quite clearly things are going to keep happening to you that are outside of your kind of circle of control. And what we're trying to do is say, well, what things can I control? And there are things in this mess that you can control, that you can get a leash around and actually start governing into where it's going to go and what to do and what ifs. We have enough answers to enough questions now to be able to say in your business, bespoke to you, what you should and shouldn't be doing in different scenarios and the timeframes of doing it. So we can plan what the impacts are going to be, and you know what to do if and when different things arise. It's so important right now. And I've said this on the other videos as well, so I'm sorry if you're getting inundated with this, but at the end of the day, right now, we are helping businesses to put in their bespoke plan for them right now, quickly, around what they're looking to do, around how they're looking to operate, so they know if and when different scenarios happen and occur, they have it there as to what their next plan of intent is to do. They don't have to wait and think, try and seek support and advice. They don't have to do any of those bits and pieces. It's all there ready for them to take the necessary steps they have to take. Guys, there's a huge saving on this at the moment in time, because when we do this particular piece of work, we are literally at the moment in time with this, it's really actually operating at more of a loss than anything else, because we're charging for just our time. And I'm not really sure, depending on each individual business, as to whether that would cover the amount of time that we'd spend on each person going through this process. But we are cutting it down to the bare bones of what we possibly could do, because I'm not here to try and make money out of this particular process. I'm here to try and help, but I have to cover those costs in order to provide it. So obviously this is the bare minimum cost that I can actually charge to be able to do this, plus also to ensure that it's something somebody's committed to actually achieving. So guys, obviously if you are interested in helping getting a plan sorted out for your business as to what you need to do in different scenarios around your people, that includes also, by the way, when we get out of this goddamn mess and start opening up and getting back to some sense of reality, how you can do that and the processes you need to go through and when you're looking to do that at the moment in time. We will start to build that plan up. There's no crystal ball here, but you will be covered for every eventuality that may come up that we know about right now that exists. And we know quite a lot right now. So if you are interested, then you can please contact me on the email address here, which is info@cavillhr.co.uk. Guys, you know, at the end of the day, I hope from these videos that you are getting information and answers to questions you may have had. I'm hoping that you'll cover all of these bits and pieces in your business. If you have any questions at all around any of these topics that we're discussing that haven't been covered, then please, again, use the email there and let me know, and I will try my best to do another video to enable you to get the answer to that. And obviously, if you've got that question, then it stands to reason that a number of other people would have that question. And what I want to do is give as much information and as much support as we can to all of you businesses out there as I can when it comes to dealing with your staff and people in your business who are so important. Guys, stay home, stay safe, save lives, take care, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.